Well, hello everybody, Kevin Keith here again. Just a reminder, the reason that the video screen is blank is because you've seen my pictures in the papers enough. It's time for you to hear my voice. In this installment of the MSA expose, we're going to talk about the Halcyon Days of the MSA, the glory days, which I would define as being from when it opened in 2008 all the way up until the end of the school term in 2011, in my experience. So here it goes. Let's talk about the success of the MSA. I want to tell you about it, and really so much of the purported success of the school, whenever it won National Magnet School of Excellence, whenever it became this school with a great reputation, began during this era. There isn't too much that the school has done since 2011 that broke new ground that wasn't first broken by the students and teachers who were there during the period that I mentioned before. But I'd like to talk about the successes because, as I said before in the first video, I'm not a disgruntled ex-employee. I really enjoyed my time working there, especially those first few years before a combination of factors made it into a cesspool and a hellhole. But just to give you a little bit of background, I was there from the beginning of the academy program. I was literally one of the people who moved the desks from one school site to the E.J. Gay campus to set up the academy program there. I was one of the people who was hired on as one of the first teachers during the first school year, so I saw it from the beginning. I participated in it from the beginning. And this is going to be my praise of MSA in this video. Well, when MSA started, as I said before, the idea of it was that it was going to be a place where the elite students would go to school at an elite campus that was going to be small. It was going to be technologically rich. I had even proposed to Miss Mary Edwards that if they were talking about establishing an academy, that the old Plaquemine High School campus over on Fort Street, right by Fort Street, was sitting there empty, was a beautiful building, would make an incredible school. You know, instead of investing the $1,000,000-some-odd they were planning on investing on building a new campus, why not just take that money and renovate that old Plaquemine High School, and you could have one hell of a school. You know, basically the Baton Rouge Magnet model. And she told me that the school campus that they were envisioning was going to be so immersed in technology, they needed the Wi-Fi, they needed everything else there that goes with the technology, that old campus would just simply be unsuitable, which kind of disappointed me a little bit. But as you know, it ended up not being a new campus that was built at all. Instead, they went to the E.J. Gay campus. Whenever the school began, there wasn't a whole lot of hope for it, I guess you could say. There was still some skepticism in the community about whether or not it would be a success. And as far as the parents who had school-age children attending school in Iberville Parish were concerned, they were going to take a wait-and-see attitude, but there were students who came. And the faculty was a mixture. Some people on the faculty were veteran teachers. Some of them were like me. They were fresh out of college. They were chopping at the bit. Young, idealistic, energetic teachers. Well, the school, for its first couple of years, had a lot of success. Now, naively, I, like most young teachers, believed that the test scores, the scores from the state standardized test, that was the ultimate measure of whether the school was being successful in teaching the students or not. Well, after a year, just the first year with our students, what a rip-roaring success we had. You had new and innovative teachers. You had hard-working students coupled together. That equals great test scores. I didn't realize yet, being the young teacher that I was, the new teacher I was, what a game, what a shell game state accountability really is. But it looked good on paper, and it gave us a lot of pride that our hard work was paying off. And I think that hard work paid off for two reasons. The first reason was because we had hungry students. I don't mean physically hungry, obviously. I mean students who were hungry to prove themselves. And the second reason was because we had hungry teachers who, just like the students, were wanting to prove themselves. And here's what I mean. Here's what I'm talking about. The hungry students, these were primarily students who had transferred to MSA from other public schools in the parish. And they wanted the chance to prove themselves that they weren't stupid. They were hard-working students that we had in our classrooms in those first couple of years. Harder working, I think, in my experience, than any of the groups that came up after them. And certainly they were better at thinking. And the teachers, like I said, they were hungry to prove themselves as professionals. Excuse me. But there was something that went into that. I'm going to focus now on the aspects of teaching. So you had a group of students who, there's a couple of kids who come to my mind, they could barely write their name when they got to the school, but they just worked their little butts off. They worked their fingers to the bone. They wanted to prove that they could do it. And you can't imagine what a huge factor in student achievement on state standardized tests that really is. I mean, you have to have students who want to prove that they can learn. But just from the teacher's perspective, here's what I noticed. In those first few years, every teacher was for himself. And what I mean by that is that however you wished to teach, that was how you taught. Whatever lessons you wanted to do, that was the lesson that you taught. Whatever projects you wanted, that was the projects that were taught. The teachers were free to kind of teach to their strength. I liked lecture and Socratic questioning. Other teachers liked projects, every day a different project. Just to give you a little example of some of the variety that was going on there. But there was no interference from an organization that was higher up than the individual teacher. There was no such thing as a different teacher who would pop into your classroom to observe you and score you on a 41-point rubric. You were free to be the teacher that you were best suited, personality-wise, educational background-wise, educational philosophy-wise. You were going to be the teacher that you wanted to be. And of course, there wasn't any of this business about being held accountable by an organization like the TAP program, TAP, Teacher Accountability Program, or whatever the acronym stands for, where they were paid professionals, paid very handsomely, to rate you as a teacher. No, there was none of that business back then. And you see, the way that teachers were held accountable to other teachers was by the word of mouth of students. We, of course, had some lazy jerk-off teachers on the campus who didn't really teach and didn't invest their time into their careers. The students ratted them out very quickly, very easily. It didn't take a rocket scientist to know which teachers were good and which ones were not. The kids would tell you. Alright? It used to always thrill me at the end of their freshman year. I would have the freshmen who were leaving my class write little brief letters to next year's incoming freshmen, and I would always get them also to write letters to me. What was good about the class, what was bad about it, what could be improved. And the feedback I would get at the end of the year was almost always something like, I hated you for the first 2 or the first 3 9 weeks, but then by the 4th 9 weeks I caught on to what you were doing, and I loved your class, and I learned so much in your class, and I really enjoyed it. And their letters to the freshmen would always be ready to study, be ready to work hard in Keith's class. That made me feel happy, because I felt like if I was teaching at an academic school, at an academy, then it was my job to challenge these students every day and to try to make my classroom, even though it was just a freshman classroom, to try to make it as much like college as I could within reason, given the age of the students that I was teaching. And I did that. And of course, you know, I had some kids who hated it, but a lot of them appreciated it. And in the years since I've taught them, I've had numerous students who came back to me and said, thank God I took your class in high school, Mr. Keith, because you were pretty much the only teacher there who actually got me prepared in a way for college. I just wish you had taught me when I was a senior instead of when I was a freshman. And that makes me realize that I did my job well, because that was my goal. Now, we had hungry students, fresh from other public schools in the parish. We had hungry teachers. We didn't have interference from higher up. This was before Act 1 of the state legislature was passed, the Bobby Jindal Education Reform, he called it. It's really a deformation. And we also had teachers who were teaching to their strengths. They were teaching to their strengths. The last thing I think that was really an element of our success was that there was a real successful integration of technology in our classrooms and in our curriculum. Now, my personal philosophy is that a good teacher can teach a classroom, even modern 21st century so-called adolescents. You can teach them, if you're a good teacher, with a chalkboard and a stick of chalk and a textbook. I mean, you don't need the technology to be a good teacher, but it was a big help. It was a big help. I mean, the kids were awesome with the technology. They would make iMovies. They would make PowerPoints. They would make keynote presentations. It was cool stuff, you know, to have that technology and the internet access for everybody at all times on campus. It was a really cool thing to have, and it was a great aid to the teacher and to the students. So I think that in those days, in those first couple years, we were a tremendously successful program because the teachers were independent, the students were hungry, they had something to prove, the teachers likewise had something to prove, and we had support as teachers among ourselves and among our superiors, our administration. Was the administration perfect? No. The first cracks were beginning to show even in those first couple of years of preferential treatment for certain students whose parents were in the clique that was always meeting in Cavalier's office. You know, these parents who would drop by just to chat with him and everything. Their kids could never get expelled or suspended or whatever because they did no wrong. You know, the first cracks in the knight's armor was beginning to show then. But, as I said, on the whole, it was a joy working there. Those first couple of years, it was like we were on a mission. We had a job to do to prove everybody wrong. For me personally, being from Iberville Parish, born here, raised here, I felt like what I saw in those first couple of years, it really just encouraged me a lot to think that these kids with the right background, if they'd have had the right background in elementary, middle school, they could compete with the best that the Baton Rouge schools have to offer. And it was a great place to work. There was a lot of camaraderie, and it's a shame that it had to end that way. But those were the halcyon days of MSA. Of course, that was whenever we first won the National Academic School of Excellence Award. That was whenever we first became an Apple School of Distinction. And that was whenever we began to make a name for ourselves and make the papers. That early success, ironically enough, is exactly what I would think, in my mind, having experienced it, led directly to the fraud that is MSA of today. It was that early success. But those were halcyon days. I think that almost any student who was on campus in 2008, 9, 10, 11, they would tell you that that was a fun school. It was a fun place to go to school. You learned a lot. You were challenged in a lot of your classes. Yeah, you had your lazy teachers. You had your incompetent ones. It was always like that. You'll never be rid of them. But it was, on the whole, a good school, on the way to becoming a great school. And then suddenly, in the fall semester of 2011, maybe, the whole program began to kind of come apart. So you can talk to pretty much any student who was on campus then. I think they would tell you that. A lot of the teachers who were on campus then would be able to tell you that too if they were to be completely honest. So there you go. The good parts of the MSA, the halcyon days. There it is. Thank you.